Welcome to the Pitbull Patti Show. This season, we're inviting you to take the Lit Grit Challenge by reading great literature just 1 hour a day, 52 books in 52 weeks to give you the grit you need to succeed. Hey everybody, welcome to the Pitbull Patti Show. I am Patti Stueckler, joined by my son Conor. So happy that you're joining me, Conor.
Somebody's got to get the ratings up.
He's a good sport. So welcome to season 4, which is the Lit Grit Challenge. So the challenge is to read 1 hour a day, just 1 hour a day. That's it. And believe me, I read somewhere recently a statistic that the average person spends 1.6 hours a day on social media. And
that's probably pretty conservative for
people. I think your dad spends more than that.
I mean, people, you got with the new iPhone update, you can see your screen time, and I mean, it's like
ridiculous.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. So just 1 hour a day, 52 books in 52 weeks. That's the Lit Grit Challenge, but it's also not just reading one book a week on average, but it's about what books are you reading. Now, I'm a huge fan of nonfiction books. Mm-hmm. My dad bought me my first book that I can recall reading as an adult. I was 18. For my birthday, he got me a book by Robert Schuller. It's called The Be Happy Attitudes. It's a twist on the Beatitudes. So it's a kind of a very much of a positive thinking type book. And that kind of started me on my own personal journey of reading a lot of nonfiction books and a love for it. So what I've seen, and I'm sure you've been in real estate for 5 years, I think, at this point?
Yeah, coming up on 6 years.
Yeah, and me almost 20. We get to see a lot of people and what challenges they have. I know you would with your friends anyway and family members, but when you sell real estate and you deal with their financial situation as well as their emotional state and a lot of other challenges that they're going through, you really can see that, at least I can see, that some of the books that we're going to cover, and we're going to talk about goals, which is our very first one. So excited to talk about this book. But, the answers, the keys to happiness really are in a lot of these nonfiction books that are so fabulous. These are great authors, time-tested. Most of them that we'll cover are bestsellers. Yep. So these are not people we know personally, but they're people we love, that I personally love. Like Brian Tracy. Wow, he's a great author.
Yeah, and one thing that's great about all the books that we're going to cover in the Lit Grit Challenge is they really do help with your personal development. I think sometimes people don't want to read and I don't like calling them self-help books because I think it has maybe a little bit of a stigma to it. But I like to think of them as personal development books. They're going to help you with your goal setting. They're going to help you with Power of Habits, which is the book we're doing next. is a fantastic book. Money management, really just mental fortitude. Some of those things that I think are really important. Psychology. Yep. So it's going to be it's a great challenge, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it if you partake in it. And the thing that's challenging and why it's called Lit Grit too is because 52 books in 52 weeks is a pretty daunting thing. But if you break it down and you read basically an hour every morning, which I read every morning for the last couple of months now, and you really can knock them out. Most of these books are between probably about 250 pages or so. So you really can knock them out with just an hour a day.
Yeah, and the grit part of it is about really strength. It's about, strength through reading, strength through literature. It really will give you the grit that you need in life. Life is tough for everybody.
It'll give you the ggrit, but it also will require some grit to get through it.
I think we look at it slightly differently.
Yeah,
Conor sees it as grit is, you have to have the grit to
do
read.
It because it's well, that's why it's the Lit Grit Challenge.
Yeah, and I see it as grit as that's the reward. That's what you're going to gain by learning new habits, setting new goals, figuring out what you want in life, touching on spirituality, definitely touching a lot on psychology and how the brain works, how society,
sales.
all of that. So we'll touch on all of those aspects and concepts, intellectual concepts, a lot of them, but can be applied very practically to your life.
Absolutely. And that's what goals comes in, where it fits in. I mean, it's the practical application of it is I think great, but it's just a great book. It gives you really a blueprint for first of all coming up with your goals. I mean, I was shocked how many people.
That's the hardest part.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's one thing was what really stuck out. One of the stories in the book was they did this study with Harvard MBA graduates. So I mean, these are top of the class, Harvard students, really, really smart people, really, really educated people. And it was shocking to me how few of them had written down goals. So they took this graduating class and they found that 84% of these Harvard MBA graduates didn't have any goals other than graduating and what they were going to do that summer. And that to me was shocking. Made me feel a little better because I haven't always had goals. I've always had general goals, but when this book kind of teaches you is that to be happy and to be successful aren't really goals, they're wishes. And you got to be specific and you got to actually put some time into figuring out what your goals are. That way you can kind of reverse engineer it and then actually achieve your goals.
You have deadlines.
So with that MBA, the Harvard MBA study was so interesting was that 84% didn't have any written goals other than graduating and what they were going to do that summer. It was 11%. Let me double check. It was 13% had goals, specific goals, but they weren't written down, and only 3% of this graduating class at Harvard had written down goals. And what they found was 10 years later was that they went back and they looked at all those students and they found that the 13% that had goals, specific goals that weren't written down, were twice as successful, had made twice the amount of money as the 84%. But what's really interesting to me and I think profound and really what hopefully everybody's going to take away from reading this book is that the 3% that had written down specific goals were 10 times as successful as the rest of that even 13% and then 84%. So that 3% that had specific written down goals was 10 times more successful than the rest, than 97% of their Harvard graduating class.
So to really just break it down really easily, if you read this book and apply it, you're going to be smarter than most Harvard graduates.
Right. That's right.
Right?
That's right. And that's such an
You
easy
like
thing
the
to
numbers, I can tell. You love the numbers.
Well, I just thought it was a really interesting and illuminating story because, you think of Harvard people and then you think of, wow, they didn't even have written down goals and majority of them didn't even have any goals at all. I mean, it's just, like I said, it made me feel a little better because, like I said, for me, I never really necessarily had specific goals. I knew I wanted to graduate college. I knew I wanted to, make six figures. I knew I wanted to be happy and have a family, but I never had really taken the time to write out specific goals and to figure out exactly and then prioritize them. I think that's another big piece of it too.
Yeah. My dad always used to say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Now, he didn't come up with that quote. I don't know, it might even have been Napoleon Hill. But he used to say that all the time when I was a kid, and something I took to heart, that you really have to have a plan, and if you have that plan, chances are really high you're gonna be successful. And he really breaks it down in this book about how to really examine your life and what you want. And to me, and I think this is true for most people, it's just really hard sometimes figuring out what you really want.
Right. What
do you actually want? If somebody forces you to make very clear, specific, desires or goals, it's not that easy.
Yeah, you're going to have to do a little bit of soul searching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But if you force yourself to do it and really make a list and then break it down like you were talking about, short-term goals, medium-term goals, long-term, like what's your 5-year plan, what's your 10-year plan, what's your plan for next week? Yeah,
yep. And that's one thing that's great about this book too is at the end of every chapter he basically gives you like a little bit of homework. There'll be like 10 or 7 to 10 bullet points where it's like, if it's each chapter specific to each chapter of the book, and if you do those steps, I mean that's one thing that I think is great about the Lit Grit Challenge just in general, and is to take notes. Because while you're reading, you might have inspiration.
Yours.
I'll show that in a second. But while you're reading, you're going to get a spark of inspiration, and how you can apply it to your life, or because it'll get you thinking in the right kind of modes. And so I definitely encourage everybody to have a notebook and take notes while they're reading all these books. And
I like to write in the margins.
Yeah, I don't like to ruin books, but for me, I mean, when I was reading this book, I literally. I don't know how well you can see that, but I every time I would be reading and then I'd think of a goal, I wrote it down. And so I came up with probably 30 different things. And then by the end of the book, I was able to kind of look at it and say, okay, well, kind of prioritize these. And then that helped me figure out what I even wanted wanted to do and what my goals should be. So
You know, and Brian Tracy, the author, he actually was a high school dropout, was a dishwasher, his own backstory, and then he got a job into sales, and he was really struggling, not doing well, and then one day he decided, I'm going to make $1,000 in sales every month, from now on, and this was years ago. He then eventually did make $1,000 a month, and then went on to huge, wild success in sales because he had very clear goals of what he wanted to do and what he wanted to accomplish. And then, of course, he became a best-selling author many times over. He's written many, many books. This is just one of many of Brian Tracy's books. But, he also talks about visualization.
Yep.
And I know a lot of the Olympic athletes have done that over the years. I remember that, was it Brian Bertano? I think in the 80s. Do you remember? You wouldn't have been born. But he was an Olympic athlete that used visualization, to win the gold medal. And Jim Carrey is a story that I like to.
Too, when talking about the Olympics.
Oh, really? Did he use visualization techniques?
I think it's in one of the books we're going to read later. I remember reading it before. It talks about he would visualize every race. I mean, he would go through, basically put a mental image of what the race was going to be like, and then he would also even visualize potential problems, like if his goggles got water in them,
which happened in one of the races,
right? And so that way, when it happened, he was prepared for it. He'd already been through this a million times in his mind. So visualization aspect of it, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and in fact, now that you brought that story up, it was in one of the books we read. I don't remember now which one. But in that story,
it was Charles Duhigg.
I think so too. It might have been in Habits.
But
no,
I think it's the other one.
He talks about in that the worst thing a swimmer could ever imagine is that you get water in your goggles and you can't see. You're swimming blind.
Right.
And so he had trained for that. So then, of course, that worst case scenario happened in the Olympics, and he was in, I forget which of the races it was, but he literally had the strokes down so perfectly, and he just timed everything so well and pushed himself that last push, and he ended up setting a world record. Yeah. So he not only won the gold, it with the worst case scenario. So isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I thought it was a really good example of
it really is, and another
and how to overcome, because you're always going to run into obstacles on your on the path to achieving your goals. So it's important, I think, to even visualize what obstacles you're going to run into, and then basically practice going over them, overcoming those obstacles in your mind. So.
Yeah, although for me personally, I don't tend to do that. I tend to only focus on what it is I want, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then when stuff happens, because like that,
right.
Then it's like, then I go into solution mode.
Right.
And then I just solve whatever,
Sure.
95% of the time, I would say. I mean, really, really high odds, I can solve whatever creeps up. Because I always say, I don't deal with what ifs. I deal with what is. I say that all the time because
I've stolen that. I've stolen that in real estate.
I don't want to clog up my brain using energy or brain power on what ifs and that kind of thing. But I understand what he's saying, especially when you're talking about the Olympics or something like that. But another really great story on visualization is the actor Jim Carrey, and this is a pretty famous. A lot of people may have heard this, but he always wanted to be an actor. And when he was a kid, his family had a lot of money problems. His dad lost his job, and I think he was in high school. So the family ended up living in a camper on some relative's lawn for quite a long time, and just took whatever jobs they could get. And then he decided to try stand-up comedy, bombed at it, blah, 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 but kept at it, ended up going to Hollywood, would drive up to the Hollywood Hills in his, jalopy and, just visualize what life was like when all these directors and producers wanted him as the star in some movie. And so what he did was, he eventually he wrote out a check. He would do that so often, and he'd be driving down, what's that, Pacific Coast, and be visualizing as he was driving and saying affirmations about, hey, everybody wants me, this producer, that producer wants me in the next film, blah, blah, blah. And then he wrote out a check for $10 million, written out to himself. In the memo line, he wrote, "For acting services rendered." And sure enough, and he set a deadline of 3 years, I believe
Yeah.
it was, if I remember correctly. And then literally right before that 3-year timeline, it was like Thanksgiving of 1995, I believe, he got offered the role, I think it was for Dumb and Dumber. And I know he was in Ace Ventura and Liar
Mask.
Liar and The Mask and a lot of other
Yeah.
films, but I think it was Dumb and Dumber. He got paid $10 million. So, and I mean, that's just not an unusual story in the sense that if you go through all
Yeah.
these books, you'll see story
Well,
after story like that.
and that, I think that's a great story because it's, to me, in the past, before I've read some of these books, I would have been like, kind of, brushed that
Poo-pooing.
aside, poo-pooed it, whatever. And because to me, it sounds kind of like BS. But what I've learned in reading some of these books, and I'm sure I'll learn from continuing to read the rest of these books that we've got on tap, is that you'll see the same themes over and over, and it's like all these examples of people who have done it and done, and had it succeed for them. But then this also, a lot of these books will break it down, okay? Because I'm the type of person where I want to know why, because that, if you just told me, oh, he wrote a check to himself for 3 years later and it was for $10 million, and I'd been like, yeah, okay, yeah, right. I mean, he got lucky and did whatever. But you see in these books, and it explains that there's a method to that madness, and it actually is a critical element of setting and then achieving your goals. And I just thought that was really interesting. And but one thing I want to talk about too is why people don't set goals. So we've talked about the Harvard kids. Why didn't 84%?
Why don't they?
Why didn't 84% of these Harvard graduates have goals? And
They didn't have me for their mom.
Right, yeah. But and for me too. I mean, it's why didn't I necessarily have written down goals other than graduating college and being happy and successful? I mean, those aren't goals; those are wishes, as he calls them. But so I think it's kind of interesting to get into that. And he gives 4 major reasons why people don't set goals, and it's they think they're not important. They don't know how to, and that's what's great about this book. It gives you step-by-step instructions and a blueprint on how to set your goals and then prioritize your goals and then reverse engineer your goals and so you can actually achieve them. They have a failure, or they have a fear of rejection. So thought those were all pretty interesting, and I think it's all really true. But what the book basically teaches you is that, first of all, you can't worry about rejection or failure. Those are other people's basically societal pressures put on you. You got to be able to put your blinders on and run your race. And then it gives you, like I said, kind of a blueprint and an outline on how to set their goals, why they're important, and how you're going to then ultimately achieve those goals.
Well, it reminds me of that crab pot.
Yeah. So that's
story.
Yeah, and it's a really good analogy, and we're from Maryland, so they're not Maryland blue crabs. I think they're like in Asia, but they have these crab pots, and the crabs could easily escape from them. But what they've found is that these crabs, as soon as one crab starts to climb up the wall and tries to reach their goals and get to freedom, whatever, that other crabs will literally grab that crab and tear it down and rip its limbs off and make sure. So they all keep each other down. Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of an illuminating analogy and for why, because people will try and tear you down when you're trying to get out of their comfort zone because what it does is it illuminates the fact that they're not trying to achieve more.
Well, and they also, I think it's more a contrast thing that if you do really well, then your peers, your buddies that you've been friends with forever, then all of a sudden they feel like they look not as good.
Right,
they look bad
right,
in comparison
right.
to you. And so it's like, hey, buddy, who you think you are? Let me
Right.
pull you back down
Right.
into this pot with me.
It's a great analogy, and I think it's something that a lot of people deal with is that fear of rejection or fear of ridicule or failure. So, the book does a great job addressing that.
Yeah, for me, I think turning 50 was like a huge fear reducer, because even though no one wants to turn 50, and well, maybe unless you're 60, then you don't mind turning 50, but the getting older, I do think that you get this weird, at least for me, you get this weird sense of you don't have forever, and you're really aware of you got one shot.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a sister pass away a few months ago, and that's just another reminder that it's like, wow, you don't get forever. And even though you're a millennial and you're in your 20s still, you don't have forever either. You're going to blink and you're going to be my age, and you're going to be, I know. Seriously, and then it goes so fast, and so it's like you better get to getting whatever it is that you want to do. Figure it out. Stop. And I think on that list of when you were talking about the 4 things why people don't set goals, I think part of the reason people don't set goals isn't even so much fear. It's more they just let life kind of a leaf in the wind carry them like that, and then wherever they land, and then they get stuck in a job or in a career or sometimes even in a relationship, whatever it may be, and then they just think, well, it's too hard to change direction at some point.
They have inertia, and they just go with the direction they're going in.
It gets harder and harder to change course and to do something else. And like you said, then sometimes if you do change course, then people are looking at you like, well, why are you doing that?
Or what do you think, you're better than us?
Or just disapproving of whatever it is you're doing. So you just have to just, throw caution to the wind to a large degree and not be afraid to push yourself. Right? But it does start with a plan, and that's what's so great about this book, Goals.
Yeah, and that's so one of these other books that and some of these, I'm sure people have read some of these other books. And one of the things they talk about is SMART goals, and it's an acronym, and it's specific, measurable, achievable, result-oriented, and time-bound. Now, Brian Tracy doesn't use that acronym. He may in some other books. I think he does. But when he gives you kind of the outline and teaches you how to set your goals and how to set good goals, and one of the things he talks about, he has 7 keys to goals, is it's clear, specific, detailed, and written down. And I think written down is really important. I think specific is really important. That's why there's a lot of overlap with that SMART goal acronym. It's measurable and objective. Measurable. It's time bound. So again, it's a lot of overlap between those SMART goals. That acronym. It's challenging. It's congruent with your values, and it's in line with your major definite purpose for your life. And that's another thing he talks about is in kind of helping you once you've come up with it. He tells you basically to write down all your goals and then to kind of go through and prioritize, and then the most important goal is kind of your major definite purpose, and then on the course of achieving that, you'll probably achieve a lot of those other goals. So I thought that was really interesting, and again, it's just kind of helping you figure out what your goals are and then come up with goals and then prioritize them. Yeah. But the other thing, too, that is interesting with respect to, it's being measurable and objective is that he does say when you first start in your goal setting, you want it to be achievable so you can kind of get the principles in action. And but what he says is once you get kind of going, that your goal should really only have like a 50% chance of being achieved, which I thought was really interesting because it's like nobody wants to set goals that they're not going to achieve. But that's the way you kind of, once you get these principles and they kind of become a habit, that's the way you really stretch yourself and then achieve extraordinary results.
Well, he talks about also having a big, hairy, audacious goal.
Right, yeah.
That it should be something so big that you're like, wow, if I achieve it, then, and that's what I've done in the last few years. I've set certain benchmarks for myself, when it came to business. And then, wow, like, it's just like, the universe just really does help you, your brain, your subconscious mind. And we'll get into a lot of that in other episodes. We won't get into that here. But
he does touch on it.
He does touch on that.
Activating your subconscious mind.
Yeah, and it's amazing how the universe and your brain will just it'll take something way out here, this big goal, and then just over time, it starts going narrower and narrower to where it starts to come into fruition.
Right.
I mean, that's just visually in my mind how I see it. So, I mean, I just think it's really, really important. And I think for somebody in their 20s like you, the millennials, that do seem to have more anxiety than, say, even my generation, older generations that maybe didn't grow up with so much of the social media and maybe some of the pressures that that we did. I think having a plan is really super important because not only will it give you, great odds for success, but it'll also give you a certain amount of peace and happiness. Right. I truly believe that.
Yeah.
Because if you know where you're going, then, you have a plan. It really can guide you.
And it may change, too. And I think that's, for me, like when I was in college, I just felt like, man, I could go in any direction. There's so many possibilities. Like, how do I know which one? Like, am I and not to get into this, but I think some of the worst advice is follow your passion because, like, for me, what was I liked playing video games and And quite frankly, I like smoking weed. So I mean, it's like, what am I going to do with that? I mean,
Yeah, no.
I mean, thankfully I don't, smoke anymore. But I mean, so it's like, I think you kind of gotta pick a direction and go in it, and then worst case scenario, you'll decide that that's not the direction you want to go in. Well, now you can cross it off your list, and that's one less direction. And now you can. I just think the first thing is starting with action, and even if it's like take a step in any direction, even if it's the wrong, do something, even if it's wrong, because eventually it'll help you, find the correct path and the path you're supposed to be on. So
Yeah. Well, I think that really sums it up.
There's
great.
one other thing I want to talk about too, though.
Okay.
Is the biggest takeaway I got from this book was he taught, and it's actually early on in the book, and it's not necessarily, about achieving your goals, but it talks about your worst enemy is oftentimes yourself, and it talks about, the greatest enemy of success and happiness are negative emotions, and that's something for me that really stood out to me and has helped me a lot, especially in real estate. I mean, it's such an emotional roller coaster. I mean, one minute you got a deal, and then the next minute their financing falls through, and there's peaks and valleys just constantly. And so I was always on that emotional. You know this, especially the first couple of years. I'd be so up and down depending on how my deals were going.
And usually down.
Well, and then I'd be
there.
super up, and then I'd be super
Not
down
now.
when it fell through because of the inspections or whatever. And but when I read that, and it talked, the greatest enemy of success and happiness are negative emotions. So I just said, okay, well, I'm gonna stop. And it's not, you're never gonna be able to totally shut out negative emotions. But if you make a conscious effort to say, look, there's nothing productive that comes from worrying, and there's nothing that there's literally nothing. You can write down, try to make a list of anything productive that worrying does, and there's literally not one thing. It just, you spend all this time and emotional energy worrying, and then sometimes it doesn't even happen. But then when it does, well, then now it's real. It's just don't waste your time worrying. If it happens, then deal with it. So, but he talks about stop justifying. He says, refuse to rationalize or make excuses. Take ownership, and I think that's something that's really big. A lot of times when, if a deal would fall through because of inspections, I'd be like, I'd make excuses. Whereas now I'm like, what could I have done better? How could I have prepared my client better and prepared her for the, set the expectation that, hey, X, Y, or Z could happen. That way, when it does happen, if it does happen, they're not totally blindsided and want to back out of the deal. But so instead of, justifying or making excuses, I said, when something like that does happen, I said, okay, well, what could I have done better? And so taking ownership over those things,
responsibility. And I would say
it was a game changer for me. And it sounds like common sense, but when you see some of these things, and a lot of this stuff is common sense, like setting goals, I mean, duh. But you'd be surprised how many people don't do it or don't set specific goals. But he just real quick, though, he talks about 4 things. He says, stop justifying, refuse to rationalize or make excuses, stop blaming. No one else is responsible. Take ownership. Take responsibility and ownership. And he doesn't exactly say it like this, but I say, F other people's opinions.
Fork other people's.
Right.
Right.
So those were some of the big takeaways I got from the book. And I think it's a great book. It's not the most exciting book, I think, because, I mean, it is a little redundant, but I think it's important to read it all the way through because those ideas will kind of reinforce each other and stack on each other, and it'll really kind of sink in the importance of some of this stuff that you might brush off as just common sense, but it's not common sense if you don't apply it.
Yeah, I think it really should, it's one of those books that it really should get your mind going and force you to turn off the TV, turn off the radio, turn off everything. Get rid of your cell phone for a little while. Go out in the woods somewhere and really reflect on yourself and your life, and it'll help you go through, ask you the questions that you really need to ask yourself.
Absolutely.
And just kind of in wrapping it up, I feel like for me too, I agree with you. Taking responsibility was probably the number one thing that besides breaking down goals.
I like take ownership. I don't know why that resonates.
Well, for me, responsibility was the key word. And it's interesting because when you read a book, the same book that I'll read, it's interesting that your brain goes in a different direction than mine. And so then when we talk about it, it's interesting to see how things you pick up on that are a little bit differently than me.
I think part of it is I'm a little more cynical and skeptical, rather. So I like to know, I could read something, instead of taking it at face value, I want to know, well, why? Why is this going to work?
Yeah, you drive me crazy. In fact, sometimes with your why. Oh my God. Yeah. Like sometimes you just got to accept.
Right. Well, I think if you're like me, you're going to get a lot out of a lot of these books.
Yeah.
Especially the next one we're going to read, The Power of Habit. I think it's a phenomenal book. It's one of my favorite books. I wanted to start with that one. But.
Well, okay. Well, we're going to get to that next week. We want people to read goals. Let us know your thoughts and wrap this up.
And take notes and write your goals while you do. I mean, it'll really you'll get that much more out of it. There's no point in reading some of these books without being able to apply it to your life.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no point. Don't read it if you're not going to then make it.
Still read it, but please take notes.
I'm saying there's no point unless you're going to apply it to your life. You're not going to have any benefit.
Right.
So you might as well read, a romance novel or something, I guess. Right. So just to wrap it up, I really want to thank you, Conor, for joining me with this Lit Grit Challenge.
Yeah.
And so you're going to be, every week we're going to be discussing books, but we will definitely want your feedback. And I definitely think it helps to get your input as well as, somebody like mine, and then see what others think of these books and the topics, and hopefully maybe something they applied and how it benefited them.
Or what they got out of it, or what their goals are.
And really, this just to wrap up this episode, I really feel like doing this season 4, because I did have a hiatus from my past 3 seasons. I took about 10 months off and really wanted to kind of regroup, and really this fulfills one of my goals, which is I really want to give back. I don't make money off of this podcast. I'm not getting paid to promote Brian Tracy or any other
We're not making
author.
money off it yet.
That's right. No, seriously, I'm being totally serious that this is really something that I want to, I feel so passionate about sharing this information that has helped me so much in the last 2 or 3 decades of my life that, I really want other people to be really happy and successful in their lives and in their relationships. So, hey, the information's out there, so I'm really excited about it. And so I hope you will take the Lit Grit Challenge. If you've lasted this long in this episode, then...
And it's just an hour a day. You can set aside an hour a day. I usually read from 8 to 9. I've got a little more flexible schedule, but that way I'm still responding to emails by 9:05.
Or even if you do half an hour in the morning, half an hour right before bed, or however you do it. Make a plan, 1 hour a day,
time block
52 books in 52 weeks. So for all of 2020, you should end this year having read 52 of the best books out there for self-development, self-awareness, money management. We'll get into a lot of really interesting topics. So hopefully you get on the challenge and join us next week. We'll see you next time.